Good morning and welcome to the Electoral Area Services Committee meeting of Thursday, May the 18th. I'd like to acknowledge that the Sunshine Coast Regional District is on the territories of the Squamish and Sechelt First Nations. We have an agenda in front of us. Do we have any changes to the agenda, amendments, reorderings? I'm not seeing anyone taking. Do we have a motion to approve the agenda? Moved, seconded, all in favor? We have an agenda. Great. I'd also appreciate a motion to receive all reports and communication. Moved, seconded, all in favor? And we're ready to roll. So, very first thing up, welcome to Annie Wise, Executive Director of Sunshine Coast Tourism, who is here to present. Thank you.
Good morning. Let's get this adjusted here. Thank you so much for having me today. I really appreciated the invitation to come speak with all of you. My name is Annie Wise, and I'm the Executive Director for Sunshine Coast Tourism. And I do also want to acknowledge that I'm joining you today on the traditional territory of the Sechelt Nation, but that the Sunshine Coast as a destination also stretches from Howe Sound all the way to Desolation Sound in the north, and includes the traditional territories of the Squamish, Tla'amin, Klahoose, Homolthco, and Comox nations as well. I trust you received our delegation materials. I know there was a lot of reading in there, and links also to our long-term strategic plans. I understand there were some specific questions that you wanted me to present on today. And the invitation I received asked about things like mountain biking and trail maintenance, garbage and parking, and the impact of short-term rentals. And when I hear these questions, I thought about this overarching theme, which I think drives to the heart of some of those questions, is really about destination management. And so to talk about that, I wanted to zoom out a little bit from those detailed questions and make sure that we have a bit of a mutual understanding of what it means to collaboratively manage a destination and where Sunshine Coast Tourism is at in terms of our role and responsibilities in that picture. And if it's okay, I'd like to pause kind of periodically, because I know this is a longer format than that typical 10-minute delegation. And if it's okay, can I pause periodically and take questions rather than waiting all the way to the end? That's okay, great. It's not, there we go. Okay, so I wanted to start by sharing Sunshine Coast Tourism's overall vision, which is we are a unified Sunshine Coast, working together to increase the social, cultural, and economic benefits of our year-round visitor economy. We have vibrant coastal communities amid exceptional outdoor adventures. We attract respectful visitors who like to discover and understand more about our laid-back pace of life and the wild natural places that nourish us. And to support that vision, our organization's mission and our mandate is to build a strong and sustainable tourism economy that's consistent with those values of our residents. So to do that, our work is based on 3 pillars. The first one being around destination marketing and promoting the coast as a leisure travel destination, especially in the off-peak periods, so fall, winter, spring. That will also facilitate the continuing evolution of the Sunshine Coast as a travel destination. And third, that will work to increase the awareness of the value, contribution, and importance of tourism among residents, government, businesses in the community. So as I mentioned, we do represent the tourism industry from Howe Sound to Desolation Sound, and we have collaborative support within that from all the local governments. We manage the MRDT tax program on behalf of the region, and that's a job we took on with the express support of local government, as well as a majority of hotel owners. We are governed by a volunteer board of directors that represent different sort of subsectors of the tourism industry here on the coast, as well as different geographic areas of the coast as well. And then we also are supported by a small staff team. And I did want to acknowledge my colleague Andrea Wickham-Foxwell in the back has joined me today. I like this graphic because I think it really illustrates that dual support that it really underscores what destination organizations need, both the tourism industry and that local government and by extension community support. So we have those 3 primary strategic documents guiding our work that I shared with you today: our 1-year tactical plan for 2023, our 5-year strategic business plan, which we're almost in the middle of, and our 10-year Sunshine Coast Destination Development Strategy. And key theme from all of those documents is that continued focus on both what we call seasonal and geographic dispersion of visitors to our region. So it's not about getting more people here. Necessarily. It's about strategically managing growth and supporting visitation when we need it and where we need it. And so that seasonal piece, making sure that we're extending, the season and dispersing visitors throughout the year, not all concentrating at one time, as well as geographically, making sure no one area is being overburdened. And so that's our goal. And so that's where we're trying to get. And we know that is a really, really important facet of our work. And so, when managed well and when those things come together really nicely, tourism is a really incredible vessel for all sorts of things that make communities great. It's an economic engine that supports job creation and generates a strong commercial tax base that helps pay for important public services and takes that burden off of our residents. But it also reduces our reliance on heavier industries, and in fact can often create a strong case for environmental conservation, cultural protection, and the exchange of ideas. And tourism activity often attracts businesses and amenities that make this a great place to live for the community as well. As a nonprofit, we receive both public and private funding from three primary sources, so local government, the tourism industry, and visitors. And so across the different local governments that make up the Sunshine Coast, we collect about $80,000 across those governments. And then we also manage the municipal and regional district tax, as I mentioned, which is a tax paid for by visitors in the community on their hotel, accommodation bills. And then it returns to Sunshine Coast Tourism for use on tourism marketing projects and programs in the region. And then the third piece is that we offer programs and cooperative opportunities for businesses on sort of a pay-to-play basis for different programs. So those elements, and then of course, we look at different grant and funding opportunities. The Destination BC Co-op Marketing Program is a match dollar-for-dollar program that we've been successful getting every year since its inception in 2016. So that's a great way that we're leveraging those resources. So I'll dive in a little bit into the tactical plan, which was the main document that was in the agenda. And I know it's a long document, and there's a lot in there and a lot of detail. But I wanted to give a brief summary. And so it really boils down to these 4 strategic priorities. Yes?
Sorry to interrupt.
That's okay.
But you covered off the governance part. And I was curious about that because on page 5 of the agenda, it says that a goal is to move from a member-based to a more inclusive stakeholder-based organization. And that's probably not tactical, that's probably governance, or is it?
That's actually already happened. So that was a goal from a couple of years ago, and so we've just been slowly making that transition. But yeah, so previously we had a very traditional membership-based model where if you wanted to be, a member of Sunshine Coast Tourism, you paid an annual fee, and that was, then you got to be a member, you got to vote at the AGM, that sort of thing. And we moved to a stakeholder model where there aren't any fees. People just have to register, and there are different categories depending on the type of person or organization that's registering. So very clear tourism businesses such as accommodations and tour operators, are in there. But there's also opportunities for all sorts of other businesses, from gas stations to the newspaper, all sorts of other things can participate without having to pay a membership fee. And so there still are pay-to-play opportunities, but they're not required in order to be represented by Sunshine Coast Tourism. So so back to these strategic priorities. So the 4 of them: destination marketing, destination management, community engagement, and visitor services. And we'll dive in a little bit into each of those and what we're working on from a tactical standpoint over the course of the year. But I just wanted to share that these are the priorities that are really guiding our work for this year. So in that first one, the destination marketing front, it's really about increasing the awareness and consideration of the Sunshine Coast as a travel destination, with that specific focus again on both that seasonal and geographic dispersion. So focusing on our shoulder seasons, and then we have specific tactics within that. So things like content creation, paid advertising, our PR and travel media strategy, producing collateral such as brochures, guides, maps, and then also continuing our what we call owned media channels, so things like our website and social media. Then on the destination management side of things, this is where we're leading and partnering on the destination development strategy for the region. We're conducting market research. We have our Sustainable Sunshine Coast initiative, which I'll talk a little bit more in depth about in a bit. We participate in a number of local committees as the voice of tourism, one being like the Ferry Advisory Committee, which I'm on with Director Stamford, and also working to both support others in their grant writing efforts as it aligns with our strategy, but also to secure grants for ourselves to further those development plans. The third piece around community engagement, maintaining and building relationships with the community is important. We know that, as the tourism industry, it impacts everybody in our community, and so making sure we're building those relationships. This includes not only offering industry support, such as training and development programs, but also maintaining robust communications with the community, making sure we're engaging with residents, listening to concerns, and also advocating for our industry. And finally, our fourth priority for the year is around visitor services. And so we're looking to provide a real seamless service that supports an exceptional visitor experience that encourages higher spending, longer stays, and return visits when done really well. So we do this through brick and mortar operations. We're the fee-for-service operator for both the District of Sechelt and Town of Gibson's, their centers. We also have mobile roaming programs during peak periods. So if you've seen, the District of Sechelt has an electric Jeep that we use, and in the Town of Gibson's we have an electric tricycle with like a little kiosk on the front that cruises around Gibson's Landing to meet people where they're at and provide more service. We also have a robust outreach on digital, such as social media, online forums, that kind of thing, email inquiries that we get, providing service in those formats. And then also leading a coordinated approach with other visitor services teams. So like the Pender Harbor Visitor Information Booth is operated by the Pender Chamber of Commerce. And so we work to support them in what they're doing, and the ferry ambassadors and other pieces. And then finally, ensuring that our staff are well supported with training and development opportunities, so that that level of service is always top tier. So I'm going to pause there for a second. I'm going to dive into a few more things in more detail, but I wanted that's the broad strokes of what we're doing, what we're focusing on this year. Are there any questions or things I can clarify?
Thanks, Annie, for the presentation so far. So you say you get some of your funding comes from occupancy taxes. I'm wondering if there's any taxes coming from Airbnbs.
Yes, the province, who through provincial legislation determines what constitutes an accommodation and who's required to collect the MRDT tax. And so prior to 2018, there was an exemption that if you had 4 or fewer rooms at your property that you didn't have to collect. And then in 2018, they removed that exemption. So now all properties that are offering accommodations for periods of less than 30 days, and there's some exceptions for like campgrounds where there's no fixed roof, but generally speaking, all everything from hotels and resorts to a 1-bedroom suite. And they've even gone further last summer to close out some further loopholes where some of these accommodation advertisement platforms, so not only Airbnb but VRBO, Flipkey, where the company itself is based outside of Canada, or outside of British Columbia, I should say. We're not necessarily enforcing these things because they were saying, oh, well, we're outside of BC. And so last year, the provincial government tightened those loopholes as well, to make sure that any what they call online marketplace is collecting and remitting those taxes. Yeah.
Director Stanford.
Thank you for this report. It's very comprehensive. I'm just wondering what your relationship is with Scredo and how these two entities coordinate together.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I consider us to have a very close relationship. We often, their executive director, Colin, and I often speak to one another. We also have, and I'll talk about in a little bit, we have a destination management council that is comprised of a variety of members of the community, but Colin, in his role with Scredo, is on that council, and so there's that collaboration piece as well. Definitely still, always looking for ways that we can collaborate and making sure we're not duplicating effort. But I think we have a really clear understanding of each other's roles. And anytime there's something that comes up or one of us gets asked about something that we think maybe that should go to you or vice versa, where it's easy for us to pick up the phone or make those connections. So, yeah, thanks.
Director Lee.
Yeah, good morning. Thank you, Chair. I was interested in the pay-to-play memberships and the benefits that would be to those organizations to actually pay for a membership.
Yeah, so we don't have fees for membership anymore as we move to a stakeholder model. So anybody that's meets just a very basic set of criteria, things like they have to have a business license if they're a business, that kind of thing, can register to be a stakeholder, and doing so is free. The benefit in taking the time to register is that they get a free listing on our website, as well as they're then included in our stakeholder newsletter and aware of various opportunities and things that we're doing, and we connect them in with our different programs. On some of the pay-to-play opportunities include things like we produce a travel guide, and to help offset the cost of it, we sell ads within the travel guide. And so if folks want to buy into an ad, we give first dibs to our registered stakeholders. We also do things like exhibit at the Vancouver Outdoor Adventure Show, and so we offer opportunities for businesses or organizations that want to join us to participate in the booth at a small fee, just to help cover the cost.
Thank you. That explains it.
Director Gavious.
Thank you, Chair. I have a bit of a philosophical question here. On page 4, under Sustainable Tourism Growth Management, we talk about community capacity. And I'm wondering how do we define community capacity? What is it based on?
Yeah, that's a great question. And if it's all right, I might continue on a bit with the presentation, because I think we're going to dive into that a bit more. But remind me at the end, and if it hasn't become clear by the end, then we can circle back on that. Is that okay?
I just had a quick one. So it's the stakeholders that elect the board?
That's correct.
Okay.
Okay, so we talked about those 4 priorities for us for the year, but I think underscoring all of that and really is the foundation of really any destination organization like us, are really these 2 pillars: the marketing and the management side of things, and they often work off of one another. And so I wanted to dive into that a little bit deeper, and I'll give some examples of the work that we're doing on those fronts, but also I think to get to sort of that more philosophical of what's possible and what is sort of defined in these realms. So destination marketing, we talked about some of the tactics that we're taking on this year, but at a broader scale, it's really about enabling businesses in the community to become successful. Marketing is a tool that moves economic objectives forward. It supports the community and its values through job opportunities, bringing in money from outside of the community that can then recirculate. And so When we talk about business success and vitality, you can see the underlying force in our marketing outputs. So here's an example from just one of our paid print ads. This was a full page ad in the Vancouver Sun that we took out last fall, 5 reasons to book a trip to the Sunshine Coast this fall. We wrote this sponsored content piece to offer readers both compelling visits to visit the coast and also to direct them to local businesses, referrals, pushing out in that manner. We also offered our partners then an opportunity to opt in on the page with an ad of their own to help leverage costs, placement, and our destination branding. So it's a great example of how we're creating this coordinated effort to support business vitality. But business support can also look like visitor education. So we know that visitors aren't always aware of local concerns and issues and water restrictions and campfire bans and all sorts of things like that. So we have an important role to play in helping get that word out. Business vitality is drastically impacted by drought, by wildfires, and other climate emergencies. And so we can support them by marketing these educational messages to visitors before they arrive and also once they're in market. Business support also means addressing seasonality in our marketing. So as I shared early on, our paid marketing efforts are focused outside of the summer months, working to support businesses when they need it most. I know this is probably a little small and hard to read, but it's just an example from one of our campaign blocking charts that's showing, all these tactics are taking place September, October, November, different times within that, but really focused on, driving that visitation when we need it. Another critical component of this pillar is leveraging our own partnerships and cooperative opportunities to help elevate businesses that really need additional support to become even more successful. So a great example is our cooperative partnership program with Mountain Bike BC. Mountain Bike BC is leading this tourism subsector, so to speak, establishing common goals and common vision for mountain biking tourism in British Columbia. So we've invested in this partnership in order to help our local operators become part of this bigger vision, capitalize on a larger opportunity for economic growth and development. And another cool piece of that sector partnership, it ensures not only that the Sunshine Coast is represented at that provincial level and that we're leveraging our marketing funds and reducing duplication, but it's also that we're highlighting, again, the local businesses and organizations that need support. So in this case, directing them straight to trail associations that are looking for support for maintenance. In case you're wondering what other tourism sectors we're participating in, we have partnership agreements this year with 7 sector organizations, including Mountain Bike BC, the Farmers Market Trail, Ahoy BC, Wellness Travel BC, Paddle BC, Fishing BC, and the BC Ale Trail. So before I move on to that second pillar, the destination management piece, I just want to pause again if there's any questions around the marketing side of things.
I'll just ask a quick one. You have a brochure for water. Do you encourage people to sign up for Voyant Alert? It's kind of on my mind right now with Fort St. John having just ducked a bullet.
That's a great idea. It's not something that I was aware of to include in our messaging currently, but we can easily incorporate that. Absolutely. Okay, so that second pillar, destination management, and I think this is really the big one that I wanted to dig into today. And I think it's really important that we carefully define destination management because it can really mean a lot of different things to different people. And so I just want to make sure we're on the same page. So destination management is really critical for communities like the Sunshine Coast, where tourism serves as a important economic base. That base is built on export and trade sectors like forestry, mining, fishing, manufacturing, a little bit of manufacturing. Tourism is unique, however, in that even though it is an export industry, the market is imported rather than a product exported. And so the economic effect is the same. Export industries create wealth and fuel spin-off opportunities such as retail and personal services, creates that multiplier effect. And if the economic base is growing, it's local wealth will increase, and if declines or like the reverse occurs, it will have potentially dire consequences with things like outmigration, population loss. When we look at BC's natural resource industries over the last 4 decades, they're showing a gradual and continual decline in investment, employment, and household incomes in many areas. Tourism, on the other hand, is growing and often growing smartly, and notwithstanding COVID, remains a prime growth generator for the years ahead. So that's one side of what makes it unique. The other side that makes it unique is that the tourism product is sometimes a single destination or attraction, but more often it's a composite of experiences involving attractions, accommodations, food and beverage, transportation, and often the community itself, not only the natural and built environment, but the humans, the community in that sense. And so the visitor experience is really the sum of all of those things together, which is very different than other, kind of exports where it's a single product. And so because of those two sort of unique factors, it means that we really have to strategically manage, not only to deliver, remarkable and memorable experiences, but also to address the challenges, and that has to really be done collaboratively. And so with that, I actually pulled the definition from the World Tourism Organization, and I'd just like to read it to you of what destination management is. And they define it as the coordinated management of all the elements that make up a tourism destination. So the attractions, the amenities, access, marketing, and even pricing. Responsible and sustainable destination management should entail a process that effectively and harmoniously addresses the interactions between visitors, the industry that serves them, the community that hosts them, and the environment in a broad sense, both natural and cultural resources. So I know that's a lot to digest. So from my perspective, when we're looking at this level, that definition really talks a lot about coordination. And coordination, I think, is that key element. And it ensures both the competitiveness and sustainability of the destination, but also proves effective in terms of making destinations more resilient to challenges. So here's a fun diagram that illustrates that interconnectivity of stakeholders and rights holders who make up a community tourism destination. And in it, you can see how coordination is such an important element required to manage the destination. And it all comes back to that shared vision that I shared with you at the beginning of my presentation. So you can see that the destination marketing organization, like Sunshine Coast Tourism, is one piece of this, but we're not able to control or, have the capacity to influence all of it. And there are pieces outside of that are overlapping, and of course it's quite complex. And so I wanted to then give a specific example, and since there were some questions about mountain biking and trail maintenance, about just to kind of illustrate what that complicated framework and overlapping coordinated approach might look like in practice. So mountain bike tourism is a really interesting product. We talked a little bit about the fact that we're investing in this provincial program, but we believe that mountain biking as an example of a tourism product has a variety of benefits which reflect our destination vision, both economic, environmental, and social. And when we look, is there demand for mountain biking? The research shows us absolutely yes. People will travel for mountain biking specifically, and that mountain bikers are aligned with our target markets. They're educated, affluent, and most of them are over 30 years old. And so we have that demand side. And when we look at supply, we've got multiple bike shops. We have lots of bike-friendly businesses. There's a private bike park. There's public trail networks. There's events. We have lots of trail groups that have partnership agreements with the province and liability and insurance in place and maintenance plans. They've undertaken consultation with the Indigenous nations with regards to rights and titles over these lands. So there's a supply. Challenges, of course, as we know, there's unauthorized trail networks that also maybe don't have proper liability insurance. There's a huge reliance on volunteers. And often those volunteers lack resources, and it also calls into question whether it's really fair to put the responsibility on volunteers to provide a recreational amenity for the community and for visitors. Stakeholders involved can have, conflicts depending on, if you've got motorized users and hikers all in the same place. And then there's also, the importance of Indigenous rights and titles, especially with regards to hunting, foraging, and other cultural practices, and environmental impact concerns. So even though, generally speaking, trails are fairly low impact, they're not no impact, and it's important, and especially as we look at high volume use or environmentally sensitive areas, or just trails with features like bridges and things that are not maintained over time. And so, and again, I'm sorry, that might be a little small, but this is a framework that Mountain Bike BC has that sort of goes through what are all the different steps for developing, mountain bike tourism in an area. And it goes from those first critical elements of consultation, engagement with government, establishing partnership agreements, all the way down to actually just promoting the mountain biking experience itself. So when we think back to that Venn diagram of overlapping people and organizations, where's Sunshine Coast Tourism's role in this? And what we like to think is that we're in this sort of bottom half and in three different ways. And so we have a listening role, we have a supporting role, and we have a leading role. So on the listening side, this is kind of that middle tier where, partnership agreements are being built with the province, management plans are being developed, and this is a space where Sunshine Coast Tourism should be actively listening and understanding what's going on in the community, but not necessarily a role that we're leading. And so some examples of how we're listening, we have membership with the Sunshine Coast Trails Society. We've recently hosted a recreation group discussion forums for those recreation groups that have partnership agreements with the province. We often send out grant opportunities for recreation and trails groups. Things like the BC Outdoor Council it has a new grant program that's coming out, so we want to make sure it's on their radar. We often provide letters of support when asked for various trail maintenance programs. And then that next piece is sort of that beyond the trails. So it's things like supporting infrastructure, bike-friendly businesses, and community education. And this is where we take a more supportive role. So examples include, frequently offered support for signage, so things like branding and graphic design, where we have that skill set and can easily jump in and help create cohesion there. We've received some grant funding from Destination BC that we flowed through that was intended to support trail infrastructure. And so we flowed that through for projects at Big Tree and at Sprockets Park that actually went to trail maintenance itself. And we distributed a tourism business toolkit on how to support mountain bike visitors. And then we, as I showed earlier, we have education messaging for visitors on things like trail etiquette, closures, and other concerns on the trails. And then finally, that leading role, so that final phase of building mountain bike tourism is about spreading the word through marketing. And this is where we have that leadership role, creating direct to consumer marketing campaigns with mountain biking as a core component of our destination brand. As I mentioned, participating in the Mountain Bike BC co-op program, and an even smaller regional sector group called the Sea to Sky Biking Campaign. We've provided event sponsorship for mountain biking related events such as BC Bike Race and the Coaster 50 to the Backwoods Jam. So I know that's a lot about mountain biking, but I hope that helps sort of illustrate it into a specific example. And we're taking actions like this across a whole variety of different, tourism sectors and outdoor recreation activities. So the last thing I want to share is about a couple important programs that I think highlight an opportunity for shared advocacy. So the Sustainable Sunshine Coast Initiative, the SCRD actually financially supported the initial development of this program through a grant and aid in 2021, and we've been able to continue on and expand that program. It's a broad initiative that works to educate visitors on local concerns with a particular focus on water conservation and campfire safety. There's just a couple more examples of some of the visitor messaging that have been on our blog and our travel guide, on our social media channels, and even print ads like the one on the right is a full page ad that we put in the Backroads map book. And they're all about that safe, mindful, responsible travel behavior. campaign also offers resources for businesses, such as sustainability messaging toolkit. We just recently printed some window clings that have water conservation messaging that we're going to distribute to businesses so they can put on their window storefronts. And as well as we offer workshops and courses for the business community to learn and improve their own sustainability initiatives within their business. Perhaps most importantly, we recently signed the Sustainable Tourism 2030 Pledge, joining a global movement of tourism destinations that are committed to creating a sustainable future for the tourism industry. So this pledge really is just a demonstration of our dedication to improving our own sustainability performance between now and 2030 in support of the UN's Sustainable Development Goals. So that's the first program. The second program I wanted to share with you is a new provincial co-op campaign called Don't Love It to Death. Originally launched last summer in the Sea to Sky region, we now have an opportunity to participate in this campaign as it scales across the province. Don't Love It to Death drives home the message that increased recreation and usage of assets is putting strain on the environment, communities, residents, and infrastructure. And if I can get it to work, I'm actually going to play their quick little campaign video. Can you hear that?
Standing. Solo cups, swim gear, lots of sunglasses, lighters, pipes, weed grinder, hats, beer bottles, lots of beer cans, got lots of boat paddles.
This street bag is he taking? Oh my gosh. Beautiful day at Cat Lake, except for all this garbage.
So it's a pretty hard-hitting campaign, and that's done so on purpose. It's meant to capture attention and tug at people's heartstrings in order to really encourage a shift in behavior, as well as to encourage peer advocacy. So this isn't a program that we're leading, but we do have an opportunity to participate in it and leverage as it expands across the province, and we have an opportunity to have the Sunshine Coast as a part of that.
I thank you for this. It's really great that if we can prevent people from creating this trash. I wanted to make sure that you're aware that we have a new program available at the landfill. It's called Ocean Plastics.
Yes.
And so if you can incorporate that into into your message anywhere, that if people discover plastics and styrofoams on the beach, that there's a place they can bring them.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, absolutely. I did read about that, so we'll definitely make sure that we do our job to get the word out on that. Thank you. Let's see. Let's skip. So, lastly, I know there was one question in my invitation to come asking about the impact of short-term rentals, and that's something that we probably could have spent this whole hour on, and so. I thought it best just to, I'll leave you with a couple thoughts on that, and then of course happy to, answer any more specific questions you have. Short-term rentals have long had a significant presence in this community. In fact, our predecessor was the Sunshine Coast Bed and Breakfast and Cottage Owners Association, and back in the early 2000s, I believe they had as many as like 150 active members. So we have seen an important shift as we were talking about earlier in that provincial policy in 2018, when the provincial government modified the sales tax legislation to include these small operators. Doing so meant that they're not only required to collect and remit PST, but as well as MRDT if it's eligible in their community, as it is ours. The province also gave allowance within that MRDT structure, allowing the remittances from these small operators in particular to be used on affordable housing initiatives. So as a result, short-term rentals have provided just shy of $300,000 in funding for affordable housing initiatives in the SCRD in just a few years' time. So not only are visitors supporting local businesses while they're here and that multiplier effect in the community, but they're also directly contributing to affordable housing initiatives. And so I know we hear a lot in the community blaming Airbnb for problems. I'm not here to swing a bat for Airbnb. That's not where I'm at with it, but I think there's a lot to consider. We know there are challenges with it, but there's also positives as well. And where we're hoping that, as a region where we land is, is threading that needle in trying to make sure that those positive benefits are felt while acknowledging some of those challenges and finding solutions. Our official position on the matter is that we would encourage local governments to invest in proper enforcement of those good neighbor bylaws, coupled with a focus on purpose-built affordable housing and long-term rental stock, which tourism will help fund through that mechanism that I just talked about that's there on the screen, and identifying any areas of red tape that you can remove for the attraction and retention of commercial accommodation development. We are significantly lacking in that commercial accommodation side of things. There's, I think, another one of the hotels in Gibson's that's, proposing redevelopment into housing. Cozy Court's gone, a number of, properties that have been lost over the years. And it all adds up. And so that's driving that demand into short-term rental accommodations. And so then if we lose those as well, then, we're not going to have much to lean on. And so I definitely think, things like zoning and other opportunities that might support, again, that attraction of some commercial accommodation development could be a really big win for the community and help alleviate some of the pressure on both sides with short-term rentals. So in closing my end of the presentation, and I appreciate you sticking with me for this long, I believe there are a number of immediate opportunities for us to align efforts. I know that regular communication is super important. I believe I'm on most of the SCRD mailing lists, and I read the paper every week, and I believe you're on ours, but I'll admit I don't always catch everything or always know who to follow up with. And so over the last few years, I've had good communication with a number of your staff, especially your water sustainability coordinators, sustainable development managers. So I really appreciate those opportunities and, hope for continued support in those channels of communication. Another opportunity is to consider joining the Sunshine Coast Destination Management Council. This council meets once a month. It's comprised of a variety of provincial government organizations such as BC Parks, Rec Sites and Trails BC, the Ministry of Jobs, Economic Recovery and Innovation, Destination BC, Indigenous Tourism BC, and then we also have a number of council members locally that are staff of the other local governments, business owners, Scredo, as well as myself and a number of tourism operators. The council discusses priorities and looks at ways to align efforts. It's been really helpful for things like grant opportunities where we can piggyback, support each other's grant applications, and advance objectives within the Sunshine Coast Destination Development Strategy. We did extend an invite some time ago, but I understand I don't think was capacity at the time. But if that's changed, there's always a spot open for the SCRD. Third is that I'd ask the board consider a multi-year service agreement with Sunshine Coast Tourism. Through our MRDT agreement, the SCRD is committed to an annual funding contribution through the MRDT term, which expires in 2026. The current mechanism for that annual funding is through the grant and aid process, and it's maybe not reflective of the relationship that we have with one another. Our partners on the northern Sunshine Coast, the Cathet Regional District, recently moved us away from their grant and aid process, and we did sign a multi-year service agreement with them that matches that MRDT term. A multi-year service agreement would provide us with stability and certainty over the course of our already endorsed and approved MRDT plan, minimize some administrative burden on the grant and aid process, and also I think it would help elevate our relationship as Sunshine Coast Tourism and the Regional District and ensure ongoing cost transparency and accountability. Fourth, consider adopting the Don't Love It to Death campaign for the Sunshine Coast. We're ready and capable of acting on this, so it's not a financial ask to you, but just acknowledging your support would give us clear direction to move forward. And finally, join us in advocating for tourism. It's easy to see tourists as others. And I know there's some in the community that, talk about pulling up that proverbial drawbridge. But the reality is that tourism continues to be an underlying force for good in our communities, providing economic opportunity and business viability, while also supporting environmental conservation, cultural exchange, and even just the ability to invite our friends and family to come visit. It's not without its challenges, but I believe we can continue to work together in that coordinated approach to build tourism as a force for good for all of us. So thank you. I'm going to stop sharing my screen if that's okay, and so that we can just talk, and I don't have that in front of me.
That's great. Thank you very much. There's a lot to unpack there.
Yes.
And several initiatives that I'm quite interested in. But just because this is the Electoral Area Services Committee, I'm just going to unpack for a minute what it looks like for me. So I have an area, my electoral area, my tax base is 99% residential. I have one business paying business taxes or commercial property taxes that benefits from tourism. But I have a lot of costs. We have bylaw enforcement costs. We have park maintenance costs. As you mentioned, volunteers maintain the trails. And the amount that we get for affordable housing, frankly, is kibble. I mean, it's nice that it's something, but compared to the impact of the illegal B&Bs on our community, it's not a fair trade-off. It's not the legal one's fine. You know, as you pointed out, the B&Bs have been around for a very long time. The vast majority of them operate really well. The neighbors are happy. Everybody's happy. They pay the mortgage. Like it works. But the party houses, the unhosted B&Bs, are a big problem, and it's a growing problem. There's one on my street now, and the neighbors are complaining at me. So we need help to enforce, to find tools to enforce our bylaw about B&Bs. And, we've talked to the province, we've gone all over. So help. That's it. We're getting the impacts. We're not getting any financial benefit from the tourism. And other problems that are difficult to manage are things like garbage and recycling that we've really struggled with. And I don't really think there's a great system for handling tourist garbage. You can tell tourists that they should pack it back with them, but realistically, is everybody going to pack it all back with them? I'm kind of wondering about that. So I think there are places that we need to work together as much as we can. I mean, you talk about destination management, but primarily Sunshine Tourism is a destination marketing organization, and you have tangible goals in marketing, but you don't really have responsibilities in the management area because the organization wasn't set up for it. So there's a gap, and that's what I wanted to speak to. If there are shared advocacy opportunities, or if there are models to assist government in the unincorporated areas with managing the costs or the services that are required, that would be awesome. So that wasn't really a question, was it?
Yeah, I totally appreciate that. Living in an unincorporated area myself, I do understand the challenges. Obviously I understand it wasn't a question. I guess the only thing I would say is that I'm sure, even though there isn't, a big business community, I'm sure many of the residents, people like myself, are living, and contributing to the community based on, their personal incomes that may have a lot to do with tourism, whether directly or indirectly. And so that resident income piece and the taxes that they're paying, it's an important piece too. And I would, just encourage that to be considered as part of the contribution as well.
And I'll say one more thing, and then I'll get to the queue. The unhosted B&Bs are basically hotels that do not have to go by any of the regulations that regulate the hotel industry, and they do not pay commercial taxes. And as long as they are allowed to operate, there is no financial incentive to develop commercial accommodation because it's not a level playing field. And that's one of the biggest problems we have. We do need the commercial accommodation, and as mentioned somewhere in here, we do need more meeting space. And we're not going to get it as long as people can make millions repurposing residential housing at very low tax rates for commercial accommodation.
There's a number of the commercial properties that do exist that have actually been investing in their hotels, and there's actually research out there that shows that in some types of communities, and especially rural areas that are near large urban centers like Vancouver and like us, that Airbnb and short-term rentals almost set the set the precedent for demand that actually encourages commercial accommodation. I'm not saying that that's happening across the board, but we've seen more investment in our existing hotels in terms of renovating and improving their operations in the last couple of years, while there's been more Airbnbs than ever. And so I don't know that that we wouldn't be able to attract commercial accommodation until there's no Airbnbs left. I know that's not exactly what you were saying, but I think that there's opportunity for commercial accommodations in spades, and so I don't see that as being a huge driver. And in fact, a number of folks that I've talked to that have been looking for space said that zoning and finding available property was their biggest challenge in terms of setting up proper commercial accommodation.
Thank you, and I'm sure it is a challenge. Director Box.
Yeah, thank you. So a couple of things I wanted to ask about. So you're on the BC Ferries Advisory Board, and so that's an advocating role that you've taken. Are there any other forms of advocating that you do vis-a-vis the talking with Moti about maintaining the bike paths or the lack of bike paths, or creating more bike paths? Mm-hmm. Because I see a future in just the road bike tourism that we have here. It's fairly large, but it's a dangerous path for people to take. And you talk with Moti on a regular basis, do you?
We have sent a number of communications to Moti,
Okay.
and encouraging active transportation is definitely a key priority. I mean, the ferries is one piece, and that's a huge bottleneck. But if we can get people out of their cars, that's a really positive thing, not only for visitors but for the community as well. We've worked closely with TRAC, Transportation
Excellent.
Choices,
Yeah.
and supporting their Connect the Coast initiative, which is that big goal of one day having a fully separated multi-use pathway that parallels Highway 101. And so they did their study, feasibility study from Langdale to Seashelt to sort of just do that initial discovery of what that might look like. And we are actually able to piggyback on that, and we applied with the Federal Active Transportation Fund to extend that study from Seashelt to Lund. So we're in the middle of conducting that work right now. So it's definitely a huge priority for us. We have a number of those visitor communication pieces that speak to here's how to get out of your car and experience the Sunshine Coast, but definitely having improved infrastructure is the other side of that. So
Thank you.
lots of letters.
I'll let Len go ahead, and I've got another question though.
I'm actually chairing the meeting, Director Bax. Over to Director Lee.
Thank you, Chair. I have to take the opportunity to talk about the unhosted Airbnbs, whole house unhosted Airbnbs. They're a terrible disruption to the neighborhood. You'll never convince me they're any good. I've had them in my neighborhood, and I think you're doing a disservice to the whole Airbnb industry to suggest that there are any good Because unless we have community support for a service like that, you're never going to get us on side. So that's just a comment. I'm sure you know that, but I didn't, I had to say it. Because I noticed that Donna did say unhosted when she was talking about it. And that is my biggest, I like Airbnbs. I think they're a great thing. I got one next door to me. I've been there before they were legal, and I've been a big fan of them. They brought a lot of new people into our community, so I think, and repeat businesses to that well-run operation. I was interested in streamlining commercial accommodation approvals. I'm all for it. How we can do it, that's what we need to figure out. And so I know there is a PEP one. I'm hoping you've input to that already, and if not, I'd encourage you to send big, long emails to our director of planning. I'm sure you'd love them. Anyways, thank you. I think it's specific suggestions is really an important thing. If you've got some good ideas on how to make it work better, we're all for it, because we'd like to see that happen as well. As a board, I'm sure I can assure you of that. By the way, a great presentation, I have to say that. Thank you. And you're an excellent presenter.
Thank you so much, Director Lee, and I absolutely will do that. I'm great at writing long emails, so.
Thank you. Director Bax.
So you mentioned earlier that you had collected over the last few years the $300,000 for affordable housing. Now, is the Sunshine Coast Association or Affordable Housing Society the recipient of this money, or where's that going?
So the actual check that gets written from us goes to the SCRD, and then I believe it at your direction, then that flows through to the Affordable Housing Society. I believe to date, the work has supported a regional housing coordinator position and some initiatives underneath that, but that can change at your direction. It's really there's some reporting and planning documents that are required by the province on an annual basis, and so as long as those are submitted, and so then it's a pretty broad brush that they've given areas to use for that.
Thank you.
That is indeed where it goes. Thank you. Director Gabius.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to come back to that idea of community capacity for a second, because I think it's great to say we're going to work within the capacity of our community, but do we have a definition for it? When do we know that we've reached that capacity? What happens then? Like, who decides? Like, I guess it's a bigger conversation, but we're at a time where we have an increase in tourism. We also have a housing crisis, a water crisis, a climate crisis. Like, I feel like we have to set some kind of parameters at some point to know when it's too much.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. And I know I was thinking as I went along, it didn't fully come through there. So, that is a huge question. I certainly don't have a number for you. And I know that's not really what you're looking for. There are many communities or even, not only destination organizations, but also, parks services and things. And in fact, I believe the U.S. Park Service has a really great framework and template for their parks in establishing indicators of capacity. And so, and obviously in those situations, they can go, okay, the park is closed, or we're only issuing this many visitors a day, and that sort of thing. But they have a great framework. And we've shared that framework with the staff we meet with regularly at the Seashell Nation, because they're looking at a number of those similar issues. Geographically, it's a very big area, and so in theory, if everyone is spread out and over different times a year, those impacts aren't going to be felt as strongly. And so in some ways, there may be need for establishing capacity at a certain place, not necessarily the Sunshine Coast as a whole. And mechanisms for enforcing that, it's really going to vary by jurisdiction and who's the landowner and that kind of thing. So there's a lot of different pieces there. But I do, if it's okay, there are some resources out there of what other communities are looking at, and as well as that the U.S. Park Service one that I talked about, that at least provides some framework and direction that might help spur some ideas. Yeah.
Okay, we're at the end of an hour, and this was a really, oh, Director Lee has his hand up. I can't miss that.
I snuck it in. I was interested in your asks. I had all sorts of ideas that perhaps we could help with all of them. I'm not sure how we would get those asks in front of the board. Perhaps a letter to us would be a good way of doing that, and then we could stick it on an agenda and consider it. I think that would be a good possibility.
I think that's a really good suggestion. I'm very interested in the possibility of a multi-year service agreement. So yes, please send us a letter, then we will put it on an agenda and we will discuss it.
Great, thank you.
Terrific. Thank you, Director Lee, for rescuing us here. And if you are sending people here in January, think twice. There really is nothing to do in Gibson's in January. I guess I shouldn't say that, but I tried going out for breakfast, and every single breakfast restaurant was closed. So
That's what we're trying to work on, trying to make it a great experience for visitors and help support the businesses so they don't have to close.
fair enough. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time, and I'll come back again soon.
Does the committee wish to take a 5-minute break before we go on to the next? Okay, so we'll be back in 5 minutes. Good morning and welcome back to the Electoral Area Services Committee meeting of Thursday, May 18th, 2023. The next item on our agenda is the DAPR Development Approvals Process Review Project Update, and over to staff.
Thank you, Chair. Staff have engaged consulting firm KPMG to lead a UBCM-funded project geared at enhancing and streamlining development approvals with an overall goal of increasing housing supply. The project is known internally as Planning Enhancement Project 1, or PEP1 for short, and officially kicked off in February and will conclude with recommendations in Q3 of this year, and will be followed up by a variety of implementation measures. The objective of the project revolves around ensuring local regulatory and policy alignment with provincial legislation and regulations, improving customer service and overall application processing, while also supporting SCRD community building policies. To date, KPMG has completed an assessment of SCRD policies, procedures, and resources, conducted stakeholder engagement, held workshops with SCRD staff, and delivered preliminary findings. KPMG will release a final report containing recommendations and implementation strategies in July, which will be followed by a presentation to the board. The project is currently approximately 50% complete and is on time and on budget. Many of the recommendations are anticipated to dovetail into Planning Enhancement Project number 2, which is covered in detail in the next agenda item. We look forward to the workshop lunch this afternoon where KPMG will speak further with the board about this project. Staff are available to answer any questions. Thank you.
Great. I also am looking forward to the KPMG presentation. Directors, do we have any questions on this report? Aha, Director Lee.
I just have to show I read it very carefully. Yes, I'm pretty sure that improve the customer and staff experience would be that we're going to probably measure the steps, and with the idea of at least predictability, even though I would like to see it a little faster than it's happening right now. Am I correct in reading that into it?
Certainly. Thanks for the question. So as part of this, staff will be certainly looking at trying to measure the metrics that we have. We've been doing some of this already. Certainly as we're sort of seeing some of the KPMG preliminary findings, we're doing what we can to sort of gear up for what we're anticipating to come. And part of that is tracking and measuring flows of applications, customer volumes and inquiries. Some of this you currently see in the quarterly reports that come before you. And those are measures that we've been tracking for the last few years. All of this is aimed at helping to inform, future policies, procedure improvements, looking at various resource needs that we might need to help implement some of these recommendations, and ultimately coming to the board for further support on these recommendations as they move forward in terms of ensuring that we are able to enact them with your discretion. Thank you.
Yeah, just a comment. Thank you. That's very informative. And I do understand that it's an iterative process, so that we have to go back for more information to the applicants as well. So I'd like to make it a little easier for directors to explain when we get inquiries as well. So that's sounds really great. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Gabius.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, staff, for the report. This report being published now, I think it's bringing more attention to the project, and I'm wondering, are there more avenues for feedback? How can I have a great community group in Half Moon Bay that is very interested in this and would like to contribute, and what are the channels that they can use to give you some feedback on this project? Thank you.
Certainly, thank you for the question. As part of this project, we've also noted that there's an engagement strategy that we have been completing. The first part of that is getting a Let's Talk page up, which happened this week. So that would be a great avenue for folks to continue to give their feedback through that great resource that we have online now. And staff will certainly be looking to engage with folks and listening to what they have to say as we go through this process. Thank you.
Sorry, making notes. So, Director Lee.
Yes, as a ex-builder, I'm very interested in this, so it's great that you're doing it. My question was, with the new website, are we going to have more insight into the applications that are in progress and those kind of things? Will we be getting that sometime? Unrelated, but quite a curious, had to take the opportunity.
Thanks for the question, and it's a good one. It's one that we are looking to our consultant to sort of help to dial in what is possible and what the best practices are out there with other local governments. So that research is sort of still in motion in terms of where we could go. We've got some insights. There are some options to look at, but certainly it's something that staff are interested in pursuing, especially if there's board interest in seeing that there. So that will be one of the things that will come in the final report, is sort of what those options could look like. And in the meantime, I would also note that, staff are excited about the new website and looking to get all the great information that we're developing as part of this project up there in terms of making the whole development approvals process experience easier and more clear for the public. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. I see no further hands up, so I think we can move on to the next item, which is the PEP 2 project, and over to Ms. Clark.
Good morning. In the 2022 budget process, a multi-year project was approved by SCRD Board to complete a comprehensive review of all SCRD OCPs. Today, staff are pleased to bring you a status update about the launch of project planning. This comprehensive project is in response to changing pressures and needs in our communities, and importantly, the need for SCRD OCPs to be compliant with provincial legislation and regulations. More specifically, SCRD OCPs need updates to reflect current and future housing need, climate resilience, including environmental protections, all with attention to reconciliation. Alignment with best practices for growing healthy and resilient communities is key. And without swift updates to our local regulatory framework, there are significant risks to SCRD as an organization, to the land, waters, and heritage of the Sunshine Coast, and to our community values. The purpose of this report is to provide the committee with information about project initiation and to ensure the committee and community is aware that in phase 1, staff plan to bring forward emergency policy matters for board consideration. As you've heard in the early findings of PEP 1 or DAPR, this also speaks to the need to align SCRD policies with legislation, with best practices and established community values. Project updates for the board and the community will follow as we get deeper into project scoping and policy updates. However, today, we invite you into the first chapter of this process to champion the exciting work and heavy lifting that is ahead for planning staff, for our organization and our community. Thanks.
Thank you. These two reports were really helpful, and I really enjoyed reading them. I'll ask one question. The emergency updates, I can think of a few right off the top of my head. Which emergencies are the most emergency?
Thanks for the question. Sorry, we're just struggling with a short microphone cord here. Certainly, some of the biggest ones that we've seen are the ones that are in provincial legislation. So those are some of the big sort of parent policies. When the provinces change legislation, it's our duty as a local government, a child of the provincial government, to keep step with their legislation. There are also some other ones that have come up in terms of professional judgment calls on best practices that need to be looked at and would be brought forward for future board consideration. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Bax.
Yeah, I understand the need to harmonize our official community plans across the Sunshine Coast to make it more streamlined for staff to deal with the different areas. I was wondering if there's going to be, if any of this plan is going to be consulted with through perhaps the area planning committees that we have, or any other public input?
Thank you for the question through the chair. Yes is the answer. Staff are in addition to sharing these information reports, staff are actively working on a development plan for APCs as directed by the board. And I think in the draft form there were half a dozen contacts on this one project alone planned for the coming annual cycle. Thanks.
Thank you, Director Lee.
Yes, I'd just like to confirm that once we update the OCPs, we will in fact update the associated bylaws. Will that be part of the project?
Thank you for the question. The implementation of this update will require all the updates of all the corresponding bylaws that touch development as well. So that will be part of the review process as OCPs are renewed. And as you've heard a little bit about this morning and more at lunchtime, there are some preliminary findings coming out of PEP 1 or the DAPR report that point us down that path as well.
Yeah, I'm going to follow up on that. I'm particularly interested in the bylaw about taking over sewer systems, which I can't remember the number of it. But can we put a Band-Aid on that in the interim, or where is that in the queue?
Thank you for the question, and it's certainly a good one. When we look at the official community plan process, it will go deep into sort of where we can build, where we should build, and ultimately, as part of that, what infrastructure we need to build there. And part of that will continue to sort of look at what do we need in terms of sewerage facilities, where is SCRD's role in sewerage facilities in terms of facilitating development in the areas that we want to see it. And so that will be certainly part of the ongoing consultation with our infrastructure department internally, with VCH, Ministry of Environment, and as well likely a lot of consultant horsepower there to help make informed decisions about what the best practice would be in terms of sewerage facilities. Thank you.
I'll just follow up. I'm concerned about taking on any more sewer systems, given the adventures we're having with the ones that we already have. Can we make sure that we don't get any more? Or that there's not any automatic people are going to be allowed to just hand it over to us without any consideration?
Thank you for the question, Chair. Staff hear the interest in the policy matter, would hesitate to offer advice on it in isolation, but it's exactly the type of sustainable servicing question that falls into the governance role for the committee and the board as this project moves forward. So we'll look forward to bringing forward packages of information through the project that will lead into supported and informed discussions and decisions on those kinds of things. Thank you.
So just to clarify, if there are any future requests in the near future to take on sewer systems, will they come to the board or will they sneak in around us?
Thanks for the question. Acknowledging it's outside of the scope of this report and, in fact, of this department's expertise, it's staff's recollection that the current bylaw requirements would involve a board decision on that. Thanks.
And over to CFO.
Just to add, Chair, there is a plan to review bylaw 320, which is our bylaw related to development within the infrastructure service, which is interdepartmental.
Fair enough. Director Lee.
I'm a little different on the taking over of the septic systems in spite of the challenges with some of the existing. But I believe the SCRD has quite a prominent role to play in environmental concerns, which includes ensuring that the septic systems are well managed and running great. But saying that, we got to be sure that when we take them over, they're good, and we have a very solid plan for the future. But I also would, one of my pet things is I'd like to see us planning our water expansion infrastructure as a means of encouraging development in the correct places. And just as a reminder, I'm pretty sure it will be in the PEP too, but just had to mention it. So thank you.
Okay. I'm not seeing any further hands up. Great report. We're going to have a super lunch and learn. I see it coming. So I think we will move to the next item on the agenda, which is the development permit application for 818 Geddes Road in Roberts Creek.
Good morning. So this development permit DP 280 is an application to implement development permit area 8 for agricultural buffering at 818 Geddes Road in Roberts Creek, Electoral Area D. This is development permit that is a requirement of subdivision, as a requirement of zoning compliance subdivision. The purpose of the development permit is to mitigate potential negative impacts that might occur where agricultural land reserve lands abut non-ALR land, such as this property. The applicant has satisfied the established guidelines of the development permit area, and legislatively, SCRD is obligated to issue the permit when these guidelines are met. However, unlike the other environmental and geotechnical development permit areas that the SCRD has, the approval of development permit area 8 has not been delegated to staff. Therefore, the board must approval is required by the board for staff to actually issue the permit. Staff recommend authorizing the issuance of the permit as described, along with collecting of the required security for the proposed landscape works. Staff are available to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you. This is the first time I remember seeing an agricultural buffer zone. So I take it that it doesn't come up all that often.
That's correct, it does not. There are only a few.
Thank you. Director Bax.
Yeah, I did consult with my other directors on this, and they were like, "What? We never saw anything like this before." But it seems that it's fairly easy and not really controversial. It is up to the Ministry of Transport and Infrastructure to approve the subdivision. Is that correct?
Thank you for the question. Yes, that's correct. Ultimately, the ministry approves the subdivision, and the issuance of the development permit is just a condition of that subdivision.
So I will move to accept the recommendations as they appear on, is it the ones on page 37, option 1? Or would it be or is
I
it
believe
on
it's page 34.
the recommendations on 34 that we accept their security deposit of $350 and issue the permit?
Do I see a seconder?
Yeah.
That's seconded. Thank you. Is there any further discussion? Director Lee?
Sorry, Chair, I just had to ask the question. What kind of things are we planting? Big trees or brush or what the heck?
Yeah, thanks for the question. Yep, so going forward, per the permits, permit conditions and covenant requirements, there will be plants like that need to be planted. Will have to conform with the recommendations of the Agricultural Land Commission. I believe that was referenced in the report as well. So yeah, particular species of plants.
Oh, I see, the regulations are right down to the kind of plants to grow, eh? Wow. Better hope the subdivision guy is a good farmer. Thank you.
Okay, unless Director Bax has his hand up again. No. Okay, I'm calling the question. All those in favor? That passes. Thank you very much. So, that concludes the planning issues, and now we get to the Cliff Kilker Sports Field Turf Recovery Report. So, over to Manager Clarkson.
Thank you very much, and sorry for the delay. Extreme severe drought events, as well as earlier and extended water restrictions throughout the past couple of years, but in particular in 2022, have resulted in very poor growing conditions for the turf on Cliff Kilker Sports Field. A combination of poor turf quality, drought, and an inability to adequately irrigate due to water restrictions and excessive traffic wear has resulted in turf failure. A full recovery of the sports field asset will not happen without a prolonged closure, void of traffic and wear, as well as an extensive turf recovery program. Staff have been monitoring the turf, and unfortunately, it's not recovering. The purpose of this report is to provide an analysis of the available options for necessary repairs to recover the turf at Cliff Kilker. Staff would be pleased to answer any questions the committee might have. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'll start with one, which is, what is the status of the well for possible irrigation of the field?
Thank you for the question. And yes, there is a well that is drilled and capped. It has what is sufficient flow of non-potable water system. And it's ready and available to be hooked up to a system that needs to be developed. So there is a capital project necessary to redesign and implement both the delivery and storage systems required to adequately irrigate Cliff Kilker Sports Field with a non-potable, sustainable water source.
And two follow-up questions. Could this be funded through gas tax? And how long would such a capital project likely take?
Thanks for the question. I'll defer to CEO.
Thank you for the question. I think holistically, I would imagine that this potential project, or the idea around when we could bring something online for Cliff Gilker is probably in scope of Water Summit 3 discussions that are coming up on May 25th, where we're looking at a variety of potential solutions to deal with drought mitigation that would include some projects on the supply side, some conservation measures, system integration, and a few ideas around moving from potable to non-potable sources for certain things like irrigation of sports fields. So it might be possible to accelerate work there. It might be possible to find funding sources such as gas tax or potentially other grant applications. There's other funding potentially that could be available for something like that. And I would imagine that it might be somewhat more clear as to the sequencing of that or the priority of that after we have those further discussions, the next one being the 25th of May.
Director Bax.
So my question is, the field itself will be closed to the public. Will there be work going on that could interfere with the use of it in public safety, as it's the primary air ambulance landing spot in Roberts Creek?
Thank you for the question, and through the chair. The only ongoing work will be our continual maintenance regime in order to protect the asset and maintain what's there. There will be no scheduled events, and we'll try to minimize the traffic as much as possible in order to ensure success of any recovery program. Thank you.
And I just wanted to dig into the timing a little more, because if we go with option 1B, to do a turf recovery program in 2024, how long would it be irrigated, or would we be faced again potentially with another drought where we couldn't irrigate it? So that's why I'm asking about the well. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So the intent would be that staff would come forward with a budget proposal that would include the sustainability of the initiative to recover the turf, which is the capital project piece. But there is some design work that's required for that. And at this point, it's very hard to speculate how long it would take to actually get the irrigation system designed and then set up. But we know from a timing perspective that budget isn't approved until typically middle of March, so work couldn't commence prior to that. So it would be work after that, and staff, of course, would work as expediently as possible, but we would be at the mercy of consultants and contractors and such. Thank you.
And the weather. Director Bax?
Follow up on the earlier question. So I'm just I'm concerned that should there be any instance that the work going on would include any equipment on the field or any that would impede the timely arrival of an air ambulance, that should that situation arise, I would ask that staff liaise with the fire chief and to make sure that they know that the condition of the field. If the field is unusable for any period of time, I mean any period of time, I mean like if you're going to be there for half an hour with things that are going to impede the air ambulance landing, it's times of the essence in these instances, and I think it's very easy to contact the fire chief and to let him know that they need to find another field to land in. Am I getting into operations here? I'm sorry.
Thank you. Through the chair. So management of project development and project implementation would have a communication strategy. We would connect with all sorts of stakeholders. So thank you. We will ensure that that is one of them. Thank you.
And over to Director Stanford.
GM Gagnon just answered my question about a communication strategy. So thank you very much.
And Director Lee.
Yeah, I'm very interested in getting on with this. The sooner we get the darn thing done, the sooner it'll be back in service. So And it seems to me the biggest holdback is the ability to irrigate properly. And it actually probably caused part of our problem as well. So anything we can do to move this forward, and things like how much water will be saved, when, cost per liter, all those things are the economic aspects of it that's got me quite interested. I would much rather use cheaper water to irrigate than treated water that's in very short supply. And so it seems to me like off the cuff, 800,000 is a cheap investment, or 80,000 is a cheap investment, sorry. But we need to know cost per liter and that kind of thing before we make those kind of decisions. And of course, we also need to know staff capacity to manage a project like this, which I suspect is not in the plan, so it's not there for this year, if we could find the money. But I just wanted to confirm with our CAO that those aspects will be looked at from the water summit and probably in the first water summit, so we can move on from there. Would that be something we could?
I don't think the water summit would have, we wouldn't be going that deep into these specific solutions on the 25th, other than looking at the suite of potential solutions. What's envisioned is for specific projects that are listed, there would be an opportunity for either asking additional questions, finding out specific, with the idea being that these additional questions could be answered and come back for Summit 4 to be more ready for action. And it's really to take the shared values that have been surfaced in Summit 2, get confirmation on those. We're going to be having a discussion about the relationship we have with treated potable water. And then we're going to be talking about specific initiatives and linked initiatives that could be forwarded in the short and medium term as a result. So we wouldn't be drilling into the intricacies of, say, Cliff Gilker well. We'd be talking about moving to non-potable sources and opportunities for things like sports fields and other things. And it might turn out that at the fourth summit, there would be the information required to make a determination as to whether or not something could be expedited and what the funding sources might be.
Follow up?
Yes, I'm trying very hard to not get into the middle of a work plan thing, which we tend to do quite often and mess up a whole bunch of other plans. So I think I like the plan, so I'm going to just plain stop with that line of questioning. So thank you very much.
Okay. I myself, I'm a little unclear about what we're doing with the recommendations, but I like 1B because I don't think there's any realistic way that we could rehabilitate the field this summer. It's not raining. And we have every reason to expect that we'll have additional water online soon, but before we have water in hand, we certainly can't prioritize sports field. So I'm looking for a motion from a director. Director Stanford.
I would like to move the recommendations on page 39.
Is that sufficient, or do we need a 1A or a 1B?
Would you like a 1B?
Thank you, Chair. I think I can see the confusion, but I believe that the recommendations as they are laid out on page 39 would encompass 1B. Thank you.
Thank you, and I saw a seconder. Any further discussion?
I have one question.
Director Bax?
It says that there's $85,000 in operational funds that are uncommitted, and that would be used to perhaps put in a new well or to open up the well in the fall. I was just wondering what the optimal time is to try to improve the field. What time of the year is optimal to do this kind of work?
Staff?
Thank you for the question, and through the chair. Optimally, it's during a time where we have minimal use. So our ability to seed and irrigate and recover that turf is entirely dependent on the primary factor of our ability to irrigate and the secondary factor of our ability to protect the new seed and ensure its growth. So ideally, we would consider doing the work in a wetter season, shoulder season, and coordinate with the regular user groups to accommodate use at other locations so that we could focus our efforts on recovering the turf at Cliff Gilker. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to call the question on this. All in favor? That's everybody in favor. Anyone opposed? You're opposed? Oh, okay. Would you like that recorded? Director Bax is opposed. I had a question at some point about the committee that's working on the sports fields, and I've now lost my place, but I'm really happy to hear that they're moving forward. And when will we hear sort of an interim update about the work of the sports fields committee?
Thank you, Chair, for the question. Without my work plan in front of me, I believe that we queued, or that we identified that we wouldn't begin the work until at least Q2. We have confirmation that all the partners, I believe their funding was approved, and so they're all in, so to speak. We have not had our first meeting. There's some turnover at the District of Sechelt, so we're waiting for some recruitment there for the appropriate individual. So I don't anticipate having our first kickoff meeting knowing where we're at with holidays and work plans. Probably going to be later in the summer, and we'll get moving in Q3. And I know we're all very excited about the possibilities, and we'll bring some interim reports back as the project progresses. Thank you.
Super. We're looking forward to it. Thank you very much. And now we have arrived at items 7, 8, 9, and 10 on our agenda, which are minutes of our APCs, all of whom we're discussing the OCP policy report from planning staff, minus Area D, which only just met, so their minutes are a little late catching up. Did staff have any comments, or shall we just dive right in? Okay, I myself, over to Director Lee.
Oh, it would be entirely appropriate for you to go first if you would like, or I can dive into it. Let me ask my question if that's your preference. Okay, thank you, Chair. I need a memory refresher now. The official community plan amendments, we've got a lot of comments. Will they be integrated into revised policy, or how will they be handled, all those comments?
Thank you for the question. So for context, because this preceded the election in the fall, staff prepared a draft policy for the board's consideration, and with the idea that it would be referred to advisory planning commissions for comment and then brought back here with that feedback incorporated. And so staff have read with care the comments from our APCs and are preparing a report that will pull all of that together and bring forward something for the committee's consideration. Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, that sounds really good. Director Stanford?
Looking through all is more of a comment more than anything, but looking through all the different APCs and their interpretation of the task in front of them was very different. And despite several attempts to kind of frame a question that worked, I noticed Area F also had difficulty understanding the brief. One of the things that I'm hoping to see is will we as directors have an opportunity to provide our initial input? Particularly, I would like to see a matrix. I think a lot of the questions that my APC had may have been answered if they'd seen it in form of a grid rather than words and paragraphs, as a way to understand what they were supposed to be looking at and what the intent was for planners and developers.
Thank you for the question. I think the opportunity for initial input has probably passed because this project is into the guts of the development phase. But as I mentioned, it is staff's intention to bring forward an updated version for committee consideration. In terms of what format or process may work best for engaging with APCs, that's something that staff are considering as part of the development plan work that was directed by the board in last month's meetings. Thanks.
Thank you. Yes, it's clear the APC struggled with this. Partly it's new APCs in many cases. It was a pretty heavy report to try and get your head around. And I think, but a couple of the themes that came up were wanting more clarity about definitions and prioritization, like which item is more important than which. And so I think that those were common themes in the comments. But other than, I don't think we have to refer this to planning staff. They've already read the minutes. So I don't, in fact, think there's any further actions we need to take. Director Gabius.
Thank you, Chair. Quick question. Will the next iteration go back to the APC for a second look, or is that's the extent of the APC's work on this?
Thanks for the question. The decision to refer a further draft would be the board's prerogative. I think staff have to do some further work on this before we'd be prepared to to offer a recommendation on whether that would have value. But something we can consider in our shared process toolbox. Thanks.
Thank you. And one other thing for the whole APC procedure, there's a lot of questions around how to ask questions. The APCs end up putting questions in their minutes, but then that doesn't get answered. And so there's a lack of clarity on how APCs can ask questions and get responses to all the members and not just the chair. So I leave that with planning staff, but. So we appear to have come to the end of our public agenda. And seeing no more excitement in the room, I am going to ask that we move that the public be excluded from attendance at the meeting in accordance with Section 91A of the Community Charter. Can I see a motion? Seconded? All in favor? Wonderful. There are attendees in the gallery. Are there any questions from the gallery? I think not. So in that case, we'll just take a minute here and then resume in camera. So, welcome back to the Electoral Area Services Committee meeting of Thursday, May the 18th, 2023. You are just in time to say goodbye. Do I see a motion to adjourn? Moved, seconded, all in favor? We're done for today. Thank you.